welcome back to the Live from Nowhere podcast. As usual, before we begin our show, we've got something important to mention first.
According to our sources, the insects that live around the western mountains have begun strangely mutating. Earlier this week, local residents started to report that the bugs had begun to organize in large, almost coordinated swarms, at first going after small animals before setting their sights on humans.
We've been told to tell you that should you encounter these swarms, don't panic. While it looks mighty scary, scientists have determined that the bugs don't yet have the strength to hurt anyone. Yet. Anyways, in tonight's story, a road trip between old friends is interrupted by an unusual errand. For this car is full of secrets, and as usual, nothing and no one are as innocent as they might seem.
So, as usual, grab a snack, settle in, and let's see where this ride will take us. Welcome, listeners, to the Errand.
The sun bore down heavy on us as we walked down the front steps of my house and loaded our things into the old 1972 Bonneville parked in my driveway. The car was a thing of beauty. My friend Steve had bought that car used from his neighbor and spent the better half of a year restoring it by hand, and it was already getting looks from the neighbors. I pretended not to notice as I walked around the back of the vehicle, dragging a heavy, well-worn suitcase with me. Before I could open the trunk, though, I heard a voice from beside me.
"Rear's full,"
said Stephen, placing his hand firmly down on the back of the car.
"Your luggage will have to go in the back seat."
Oh, okay. You sure it won't be too cramped back there?
"Should be fine. You can just squeeze yourself in. Unless, of course, Emily's changed her mind about coming along."
She hasn't. Trust me. Before Stephen could say anything else, I picked up my bag and moved it into the back seat of the car. I sat down next to it, closing the door gently behind me. I waited as Stephen went back up to the front steps, stopping to talk to his girlfriend as he got the last of the luggage, and checking that all the doors and windows were locked. I couldn't make out what either of them were saying, but it was clear Laura wasn't very happy about how long it was taking us to leave. It made sense. I'd known her since college, and she had never been the type to waste time. I also wanted to get going badly. With each passing second, the back seat of the car grew warmer, more stuffy. And though I couldn't place it, something in one of the bags was starting to smell strange. As I settled in, the passenger side door opened in front of me. Suddenly, the car was flooded with the smell of perfume.
Hey, Harry, how you been?
Hey, Laura. Not bad. You?
Doing well, just want to get going is all.
She threw a look towards Stephen, who'd gotten distracted by something on his phone. Rolling her eyes, she reached over towards the driver's seat and gave him a couple of impatient honks. Startled, Stephen threw up his hand sign for, "Give me a second," before looking back down. Laura scoffed and settled into her seat.
Hey, by the way, sorry to hear about Emily. Hope you're doing alright.
Oh, my eyes darted to a nearby corner. No, I'm fine. Just a little fight, that's all. It'll be alright. Thanks for asking, though.
Still, though, I would have loved to have had her here.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for this, though. It'll help to get away for a bit. Get some sun.
Trust me, we needed an excuse to get out of the house as well.
We sat in awkward silence as we waited for Stephen to get back in the car. In the front seat, Laura kept looking down at her watch, her patience running thin. Finally, Stephen emerged from the house, locked the door, and made his way to the driver's seat.
We were supposed to leave an hour ago.
Laura said, annoyance dripping from her voice.
We still have 3 state lines to get across before we reach the shore.
Mm-hmm.
Stephen brushed her off, looking down again.
No, I mean it.
Suddenly, she lowered her voice.
I mean, you, of all people, should understand why we need to...
Laura, look at this.
Stephen showed her something on his phone. Her face fell, understanding something. Then they started whispering furiously amongst themselves. Hey, is everything all right up there? My question seemed to shock them both.
Oh, everything's great. Everything's fine.
Something unexpected just came up. We should be fine. It's just... we have one last thing to do before we leave town. For work. You okay with that?
Hey, if you gotta work, you gotta work.
Great. Shouldn't be too long. Sooner we do this, sooner we can be on our way.
What weren't they telling me? I tried not to think about it and settled in my seat as the car started forward down the road towards the city. It took us a half hour to get into the city. Once we arrived, we turned down a winding side road and squeezed the car into a tight parking spot along the curb. Killing the engine, Steve and Laura got out from the front seat and walked briskly across the street into a small, empty cafe tucked between 2 large apartment buildings. As they reached the entrance, they stopped to mutter a few things between the two of them. Laura still looked worried about something, but before she could say much, Stephen threw open the door and stormed inside. Back in the car, I double-checked my bags to make sure I'd packed everything. The trip had been on very short notice. Stephen basically just called me up and told me to start packing. But hey, I had the vacation days. Plus, I needed some time off. Things hadn't been good lately. I looked back at the cafe to see how the others were doing. They had all moved into the back room. The rest of the place was nearly empty, except for a frail old man reading a newspaper on the bench outside. I swear, in all the years I'd lived in this town, I'd barely seen this cafe even quarter full. It always struck me as fishy, you know? Even today, mid-afternoon on a weekend, in this gorgeous weather, when even the struggling restaurants were making back the lion's share of the rent, this joint was dead quiet. Just a single customer. And now come to think of it, I'm pretty sure that guy's the owner. I mean, you gotta wonder how these kinds of places survive. Rent in the city isn't cheap. Better shops, much better than this, went under all the time. And yet, places like this, places that couldn't get foot traffic on a good day, had managed to scrape by as long as I'd been here. Made me suspicious. Ain't a lot of ways in this world you can get money without having customers. And most of them aren't pretty. Here I go again, making something out of nothing. I always did it. I mean, in this world, you can't trust anything. Least of all people in it. They steal, they swindle, they deceive, they lie. But maybe I can't go too far. Because recently, I'd also seen how it can hurt just as much to distrust the right person as it can to trust the wrong one. Sometimes, even more. And either way you see it, it's the reason that I'm alone in this car. I checked my watch. It'd been nearly an hour. If I'd known it would be this long, I would have asked Stephen not to park in the sun. The car was almost a sauna. Oh, and that smell was back. I mean, what was that? Did we hit something on the road? I covered my nose with my sleeve. A few minutes later, Stephen and Laura walked out of the back room into the street. But this time, something was different. Laura was practically storming out, and Stephen was in tow, trying to desperately say something into her ear. She wasn't listening, and quickly walked back across the road before getting back in the car and slamming the door behind her. As Stephen followed her back inside, I began to make out some of what they were saying.
Everything's gonna be fine, okay? They just want to have another meeting. It won't hurt to just hear them out.
Are you hearing me? No one just has a meeting with those guys. We need to go.
What? So we're just gonna run from our problems? You know what'll happen if...
You know why we need to go. Every second we waste just driving around carefree is another second.
Laura, you need to calm down.
This was your mistake anyway. You know that? Your mistake. Don't tell me to calm down. We need to get out of here right now.
Laura, it's a few more hours. I don't like it either, but it'll be fine. Look at me in the eyes. It'll be fine, okay?
What'll be okay? I asked suddenly. Both of their heads immediately swiveled around towards me. They looked like deer in headlights.
Nothing you need to worry about. We might just have to stick around a couple more hours before we leave. Sorry, business emergency.
No problem at all. I'm fine. If something's wrong with you guys, though...
Thanks, but there's not much to do anyway. We just have to wait a bit.
Eventually, the car got too hot to ignore, so Stephen rolled the windows down and started driving aimlessly around the city. I rested my head on the door and looked out towards the street, letting my thoughts wander. In the front seat, though, you could cut the tension with a knife. Whatever had gone down in that meeting, it hadn't been good. I looked behind us. Come to think of it, was that the same blue sedan that was behind us 5 minutes ago? I started watching more closely. Something was fishy. It seemed like every turn Stephen made, the sedan made as well. Every so often, it'd make a sudden turn and disappear behind some buildings, but it always seemed to catch up with us after a few minutes. It was clear. We were being followed. The front seat had also seemingly noticed this. I noticed Laura looking back every few seconds, tugging on Stephen's right arm to signal when to turn. Stephen kept looking in the rearview mirror, at one point catching my eye before we both looked immediately away. Together, the sedan and the Bonneville wove through the city streets, Stephen growing increasingly impatient at his failure to shake our silent stalker. But as we both came up at the red light, Laura seemingly lost patience and tugged hard at Stephen's arm. Suddenly, our car sped forward into the intersection, cutting the red light and leaving the sedan trapped by the opposite flow of traffic. Quickly, Stephen made a few more turns to shake him for good. A few hours later, we arrived at the second meeting. As the sun began to set, Stephen pulled the car into the parking lot of an empty laundromat. Quietly, we pulled into the parking spot, and Stephen shut off the engine. He seemed worried. Without saying anything, Laura opened her door and got out of the car. Turning towards me, Stephen tried to lighten the mood. He smirked.
We shouldn't be too long. Hey, if we're not out in 15 minutes, leave without us.
Almost immediately, Laura shot him a dirty look, and he looked down in silence before they both started across the parking lot. From the rearview mirror, I could see a few men, all dressed in suits, meet them at the front door before they all went inside. Well, all except one of them, who stayed by the entrance and started watching the parking lot. I slouched in my seat, hoping he didn't see me. Soon, the other men disappeared into the dimly lit, grimy back rooms of the building. What was this place? Who are these people? Laura had seemed awfully worried about taking the meeting. I guess I chalked it up to not wanting extra hassle, but no, she seemed more scared than that. I never really knew what Steve and Laura did for work. They didn't talk about it much. All I knew is it kept them busy and gave them a decent living. Whenever I'd imagined it, I'd pictured, I don't know, something in an office, paperwork, supervisors, clients, red staplers, but I guess all kinds of jobs pay well. What kind of laundromat needs a doorman anyway? I took a breath. Relax, I thought. You're working on this. Remember? You take something perfectly innocent, something good, and you overthink it. Half an hour later, it's some big conspiracy? This isn't who we are. Not anymore. We can't do this again. Not after Emily. I bit my lip. The memory was too fresh. I'd been trying to push it off, but no. That wasn't overthinking. I mean, I never found out, but there was something there. I had good reason to be suspicious of her. I mean, I remember how things were. I'd been so convinced right up until I confronted her. But well, when I saw the look on her face, it was a hell of a wake-up call. I'll tell you that. But by that point, it didn't matter. God, what is that smell? Now that Laura and Perfume had left, it had come creeping back again. It grew thicker by the second. Ugh, we definitely ran something over. Or left some food out, or something. I reached over into the front seat and turned on the radio. Good thing Steven had left the keys in the ignition for me. Maybe if I found a good distraction, I wouldn't drive myself crazy. The others would be out before I knew it. In the rearview mirror, I saw the man by the door glare across the parking lot at me as he barked something into his cell phone. Slowly, the sun disappeared over the buildings. The shadow of the city loomed over the cars as the minutes slipped by. My thoughts began to take hold of me. I'm not crazy, right? This feels weird. No, come on, just be patient with them. Meetings take time. Just take some deep breaths. But still, this doesn't feel right. That guy keeps looking at me. No, wait, that's almost the definition of being paranoid. But I'm not paranoid. Steven and Laura were definitely keeping something from me earlier. Sounded like something was wrong. What if they were in trouble? That would mean I'm in trouble, right? Were they bringing me into their trouble? These people didn't seem safe. That guy keeps looking at me. Who holds a meeting at 6 p.m. at a laundromat anyway? Drug dealers? No, calm down. This isn't Breaking Bad. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. It was too dark to see, but across the street, I could have sworn I saw the same blue sedan drive by. My heart plunged into my stomach. I closed my eyes, focusing on my breath. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. In, out. In, out. Nearly an hour and a half since they left, I saw movement in the doorway of the laundromat. Slowly, I reached into the front seat and adjusted the mirror to see what was going on. It wasn't Steven or Laura. An older man wearing a faded, tattered suit jacket walked up to the door. Something was on his face. It was on the suit as well. I was too far to see what it was, but it caught the light for a brief second. A flash of something red and shiny. He paused for a moment to talk to the man at the door, pointed at me, and they both turned towards the Bonneville. Instantly, I dropped to the floor, hoping they wouldn't see me. After a few seconds, I got up. They were both walking towards the car. The doorman smiled at me, an eerie, toothy grin, as they walked closer and closer. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. Breathe. Screw it, I know what this was. I leapt into the front seat and turned the ignition. I watched the two men disappear into the rearview mirror. They won't be far behind. But the men from the laundromat were the least of my worries. As I sped down the highway towards home, I saw the blue sedan slowly growing on my side view mirror. Same driver from before. Same twisted glare. I quickly sped up and tried to lose him on the off-ramp, but when I went to check my mirrors, he was still there. Crap! I couldn't go home now. I led them all right to me. Not knowing what to do, I sped up again, trying to lose him in the night. The smell was getting worse, attacking me from behind in thick, nauseating waves. I clenched my teeth, trying not to gag. I kept on driving, speeding on and off a maze of ramps and highways, the blue sedan staying in pursuit. After some time, I knew I had to try something risky. Slowly, I began to merge towards the left lane, lifting my foot ever so slightly off the gas pedal and letting the car decelerate until the blue sedan was right behind me. Keeping a close eye on the other car, I kept the distance, waiting. Suddenly, as we were about to pass another ramp, I slammed the brakes and turned sharply off the highway. The blue sedan swerved out of the way, and I watched it disappear down the wrong road as I sped up the off-ramp. I let out a laugh of relief. Victory. But it was only a few moments later that I realized which exit I pulled off at. Oh no. As I pulled up to the toll booth, I became extremely aware of how I looked. Hair ragged, clothes tattered, speeding down the highway in a car that wasn't mine, packed to the brim with luggage, trying to cross state lines? Oh, and that smell that poured from the car in noxious buckets as I opened the window to talk to the attendant. If I had had some other people with me, I'd look less suspicious. Here, I look like I'm trying to run from something. Oh God, was I a cover? Why were Stephen and Laura so desperate to get away? Were they running from something too? Why was I really here? The attendant. They were looking at me funny. Why were they looking at me funny? I must have looked so guilty. Kept asking questions, looking like a wreck, slapping on this phony smile as I tried to make small talk. That smell must have pushed things over the edge, though. The first time I noticed it, I thought we'd hit an animal, but no, it couldn't have been. It couldn't have. As I sped off, I saw the attendant snap a picture of the car with their cell phone before grabbing the landline and making a call. Worse, I wasted too much time at that booth. The blue sedan had made a reappearance in my rearview mirror, and it was gaining. I stepped on the gas. Were those sirens? The smell from the back seat kept getting worse. I opened the window, trying to air out the car. Oh no, the wind sounds like helicopters flying overhead. The sirens were getting louder, nearer. If the blue sedan didn't get me, they certainly would. I didn't even know where I was, let alone where I was going. Even though I still had plenty of room to run away, I felt the sinking feeling that I had already been trapped. I was far away now, in the mountains. The roads are dark, empty, winding, covered under layers and layers of trees. No streetlights either. You couldn't see anything around these turns. It was dangerous, but it might be my last chance. In a final desperate attempt, I sped down the road, putting distance between me and the blue sedan. Then after I drove around a particular bend, I took a sharp turn down an unmarked gravel road and killed my headlights. I'd finally lost him. The smell. I had to find that smell. Slowly, I turned off the car and climbed into the back seat. Shuffling through the luggage, I began to sort through every suitcase, every bag, clothing, food, electronics. It all checked out. And then it occurred to me. It wasn't coming from the back seat. It was coming from somewhere else. The only place in the car Stephen hadn't let me into. The trunk. I looked out the back window, towards the rear of the car, just in time to see a pair of headlights speeding towards me from behind. I braced myself as the blue sedan crashed. The Bonneville landed in the bushes a few feet from the side of the road. The back window was shattered in the crash and the trunk was knocked wide open. The smell was worse now, spilling through the shattered glass in stomach-churning waves. From behind me, I could hear a pair of footsteps walk over from the wreckage of the blue sedan. The footsteps walked right up behind the car, stopping at the rear as whoever was there looked to see what was in the trunk. I closed my eyes, expecting the worst. Threats, shouting, gunfire. Instead, I heard something much softer. At first, it was very heavy breathing, but breathing turned into hiccups. Hiccups turned into sobs. The man was weeping. Over what? I could only guess. After a few moments, the man shut the trunk, gathering himself. Hiding on the floor of the back seat, covered by luggage and debris, I shuddered. This was it for me. Once he found me, it was over. I heard footsteps back from the trunk, walking slowly around the side of the smashed car. Right as he laid his hand on the door handle, though, I heard him stop, quickly turning away from the car, walking backwards before running lightly into the woods. A miracle, I thought. He didn't see me under all this. He thinks I ran. I might have a chance. I let out a long sigh of relief. But it only took a few seconds to realize that the truth was far less fortunate. As soon as his footsteps faded, I heard something else. Wailing sirens, barking dogs, the whoosh of helicopters coming in from above. Lights flashed through the trees, growing louder, brighter, closer. I laid my head on the seat as I waited for them to find me. And for the first time in weeks, my thoughts didn't wander. In fact, I didn't think about anything at all. Instead, closing my eyes tight, I started to feel sand beneath my toes, the salty ocean breeze on my face, gulls squawking in the distance, waves lapped gently at my ankles. The sun beat down on my shoulders, and for one short moment, I forgot everything. A smile spread across my face. This was just what I needed after all. Hi everyone, hope you enjoyed this episode. We're the Live from Nowhere podcast, bringing you original stories every 2 weeks. This week's story, The Errand, was written by Carl Kutsia and voiced by Zach Zadie. Additional voice roles were performed by Hope Jarris and Jamie Granado. The show is edited by Zach Zadie and scored by Carl Kutsia. And finally, we'd like to thank and welcome our producer of the show, Jamie Granado. This episode was the 6th episode of our first season, which will have 10 episodes. New seasons are launched every 2 weeks, so stay tuned for more. You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and YouTube. And if you enjoy our stories, you can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook for all the latest updates. We'll see you next time.